Within CSIRO, there's a group of us who have developed a tool called RAPTA, which is Resilient Adaptation Pathways and Transformation Assessment. It is almost a 200-page document on a process. We're going to run you through some of that process. And we are looking at a shortened document that is a bit more accessible to people because it is such a thumper. People don't necessarily read, although you can just dip into the various different sections of it. But it was Jeff, actually, the Global Environmental Fund, asked us to actually pull together this document to help them with some of their design and then implementation of their projects. And it's being scaled out in a number of different countries as Jeff scales out its adaptation work. But it does have a wider application. I'm going to talk for a bit, and then I'm going to get Mark up to do the case study, and then we'll go back to doing the actual work, the kind of exercises that we're going to do. And I hope those will be useful for you, because those are the exercises we're going to do are going to be the kind of exercises you will be able to go back, hopefully, and do with your teams to actually help you better design your projects and your programs. In a rapidly changing world, I mean, when you look at this graph, it's almost like everything has suddenly, since the 1950s, kind of almost completely gone off the scale, whether it's biodiversity change, use of motor vehicles, carbon emissions. We all know about climate change and changing temperatures. Water use has skyrocketed, and it's only increasing. And it's not just increasing because of population increase, it's also increasing because the world is changing very fast, and as people become wealthier, so there is increased consumption. It's great that we're lifting people out of poverty, which is an absolutely fantastic fantastic thing, and we're meeting a lot of the goals that we've set. But at the same time, we're putting huge pressures on our environmental and social systems because of increased consumption. There are other crises like the global financial crisis, which severely impacted both developing countries and developed countries. Once again, we're seeing an economic downturn in a lot of the Asian countries, and that's severely impacting on people who are sort of earning less than $2.50 a day. I'm seeing that in a lot of my work. Other shocks include terrorist attacks and increasing conflicts, which are increasing people's mobility and migration, but also just kind of making people displaced. There are other shocks like health pandemics, TB, malaria, dengue. All of these are spreading and can spread more quickly because we live in a globalized world. And these are just some of the shocks. I'm not going to go into all of them. But it does end up, in terms of all these rapid changes, how do we really design and manage development projects so that we can transform communities? A lot of the communities we all work with, life is pretty marginal, and these rapid changes can rapidly put them into poverty traps and entrench their poverty. As I said, CSIRO has developed this tool, RAPTA, and what we're trying to do is to really look at how we can look at systems and develop interventions that take a systemic approach, that look at what are the drivers of change, what are the drivers of change within the system, and that is informed by concepts of resilience and adaptation and transformation, but that these concepts are applied in a very, very intentional way so that we can move towards the Sustainable Development Goals. And there's the web page for that. As I said, when we talk about resilience and adaptation and transformation, we're not just talking about it in terms of climate change, we're talking about it in terms of communities. How are they? What are the kind of things we can do to make them more resilient? What are the things we can do to help them better able to adapt to the shocks and changes that are happening within their communities? And this is the RAPTA framework. I mean, this would be very familiar to a lot of you. It's pretty much a project management framework. But what CSIRO did a lot of interviews and did a literature review of what was good practice around implementing projects in the resilience and adaptation space. When you look at this, we've kind of got it in a linear approach, but it's not necessarily linear. You can come in at any stage. We're going to come in today at the systems description and systems assessment level, and we're going to also then look at options and pathways. you may want to start there. Often if you have the scope for a project or a program, that's the best place to start because you're understanding your system. A lot of us don't have the scope to start there. We're given money for a specific project, we're given money for a specific intervention, and we have to just work around that. So the scope is already set up at the start. We often already know who we're engaging with and what the governance structures are. But what I would encourage you, if you do have the scope, that at the start of your project, you actually map out who are the people you need to engage with, set up stakeholder engagement plans, how are you going to engage with them, what are their roles going to be, depending on how complicated or complex your projects are. And then developing a theory of change with them. This is really important because that helps you set up your project logic or your program logic. It helps you monitor your programs. You can use your stakeholders to help you define your theory of change. If you've already got some of those already set up, you can then go to your systems description. When we look at the systems description, it's basically understanding what the biophysical context is, what the socioeconomic context is, what the governance structures are within the area that you work. And Mark is actually going to talk us through the Kokoda Trail example and give us an overview of what a system looks like. And I think when we look at using RAPTA, the things that we focus on is it's not just what the influence of the project is, we try and look at what are the drivers that are outside of the project that could be influencing that system. And are there interventions that we need or stakeholders we need to engage with in order to improve our interventions or actually even to implement certain interventions. Once you've done your system description, you can do your systems assessment. When we look at the systems assessment in terms of RAPTA, we look very much at what the risks are and what the vulnerabilities are, and we look at what the indirect and direct drivers of changes are or causes of the issues within communities or within the areas that we work. And by trying to understand that, from that we can then design implementation activities, which is we moved on into number 6, which is your options and your pathways. But without really understanding what the root causes are of your issues, both your direct and indirect causes, you can often design activities that actually don't really address the issue that you're trying to address. And so that's where the systems thinking comes in. And we will go through an exercise later on today where we will look at what are the issues, what are the impacts, both the direct and indirect impacts, and then what are the drivers of those issues, both the indirect and the direct drivers, and why it's important to understand those in terms of the design of projects. And then finally, one of the key things of the RAPTA thing is learning. And I know that all of you have programs or actually have in place learning systems. It's really, really important in terms of feeding back into all of those, basically feeding back into your theory of change you're learning. You need to change your theory of change if it's not working. Learning on who you should engage with back into the governance. Maybe as you learn more, you can refine your systems assessment. We don't see this really as a linear process, but we do see it as a circular process where there are constantly these iterative feedback processes into our theories of change and into who we engage with. When you look at this, the red ball is the system. It can be transferred into a different state if you identify and influence the controlling variables. The controlling variables are the things that are the indirect and the direct causes of whatever your issue is. Basically, what we try and do is try and see what are the interventions that we can put in place that will shift that ball from where people are basically just in the resilience space and basically just coping to becoming a lot more able to adapt and to transform their system and operate in the next loop, which in this picture is supposed to be where it's more adapted and more transformed so that people are not constantly in crisis.